Here we go. We're live. All right, so I call this meeting to order. SA Appropriations Committee. We are convening at 2:04 p.m. It is October 11th. So let's go into a roll call vote. So Senator Takor.
Here.
Senator Sarwar.
Here.
And Senator Hilkert.
Here.
Okay, I am here. Senator Fang is not present, so he is, I don't know exactly why, but he texted me, told me he couldn't make it here, so that's fine. I told him I was going to record the meeting. He was going to catch up, so it's not a problem. Okay, so can I get a motion for the approval of last week's minutes?
Motion.
Okay, motion from Senator Takor. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Was that Sarwar?
Yep.
Awesome. Any objections? Okay, seeing none, the minutes are approved. So we're now going into public comment. Is there any public comment for this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I am looking for a job. I need money. If anyone has any leads on that, please let me know. I'm also open to internships. I have my resume with me.
Yo, man, just go to Home Goods. We're looking for people right now.
Whoa, Sarwar, out of order, Sarwar. I'm going to put an end to that. Back to you, Takor. You got your free speech and your time allotted. Take it back.
Thank you. I'm also, I'm looking into internships, any sort of paid internships, anything of that sort, so yeah. Let me know.
Awesome. And I will just say, he's not looking for suggestions. He's looking for leads. Okay. He's looking for leads on any job. So let's make sure that's reflected in the record. Okay. Senator Sarwar, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say go to Home Goods. We're looking for people right now, and they pay pretty well.
That's wonderful. Okay, cool. Any other public comment for this afternoon? Seeing none, we are going into the chair's report, which is myself, and I'm going to say, welcome committee. Thank you for being here another Sunday. I think this is going to be our official meeting time, if that's cool with everybody, and we can always talk in the group chat about, what works. But again, if you can't make it, please email me ahead of time, preferably 24 hours in advance via email so I can have it on the record. I'm going to work with the vice chair to have your committee attendance in by, I'll probably announce it this Wednesday, Senate meeting. So we'll have that locked in. It's going to be a mix of excused and unexcused absences. So that will start and be into effect by next appropriations meeting. Also, the forms have been live. They have received no submissions on all three lines from any student groups. So please reach out if any student groups need help. I'm expecting a fairly slow year because of the pandemic, but I'm still expecting some student groups to come through, especially our new and unfunded student groups. So I'm sent an email to the Public Relations Department of the Executive Branch, seeing if they could help us out, just like they did last year, by making a flyer for the Appropriations Committee, just to kind of blast it. Excuse me if you can hear that. My roommates are playing 2K. But hopefully they can blast that out to the student population, just let our student groups know. I've not gotten a response to the email. I really hope I do. If not, I'll make one myself, but I'm really looking for some support there, just like we've gotten in the past. Let's see. Today on the agenda, we got the Appropriations Handbook, which is a requirement per the bylaws. And also we have a wonderful training with our Senate Vice Chairman, Jordan Osley, who's in the House. And I think that's it for my report for now. Oh yes, my office hours are official. It's going to be Mondays, let's see, 9 to 12, and then Tuesday, Thursdays, 9 to 12:30 p.m. And that's going to be virtual, and I got my Zoom link on my involvement. And if that bylaw that we passed last Senate meeting is signed by the president and enacted, then it'll have to be on my involvement, up on the wall in the SA office, and the SA website. So that's it for me. Any student group can come in during that time. It's really helpful. One of my requirements in the bylaws is to be there for the student groups. So it's going to be really helpful that I'll be available 10 hours a week, but just let student groups know as well that I'm here for them. Okay, so we are now going into the ranking members report. We do not have a ranking member at this time. Appropriations business, no requests. unfinished business. Oh, wait. Is there any questions for me for my report? Sorry, I kind of skipped over that. Apologize. Okay. So no unfinished business. We're now going into new business. Real quick, the Appropriations Handbook. So I'll stop sharing my screen here and I will share the Appropriations Handbook. So basically, this was actually a bill that I sponsored my first year as a senator. It was basically, we had a lot of problems in the Appropriations Committee in the 2018-2019 academic year. And it was problems with us not using the bylaws. We didn't have the budget available. There was a lot of precedents that we were setting and then breaking like a week later. So we actually had a huge appropriations bylaw like revision meeting. And this was an idea I brought up that we should have a handbook to kind of guide us and help us out. So it requires a couple things. It could have more. This is pretty similar to the one I made last year, but I'm just going to go through it real quick. So the requirements is it has to have all bylaws related to appropriations. It has to have the appropriations rubric, and it has to have the external budget. It doesn't have to have a precedent tracker, but I put it in there because it's actually really helpful. So if we go through section 1, and by the way, the requirement is we have to have this present at every meeting. We actually have, I'm pretty sure the 2019-2021 is still in the hub. I actually hid it behind where the computer is. So if anyone goes to the hub, just kind of reach in the cabinet in the conference room, you'll probably find it. But we'll have it available virtual. So if this is approved today, I'll have it in PDF form, and it's just good to have it open. So here's all the bylaws on appropriations all the way through. And then it's got some stuff from the 500 sections because we're mentioned there. It's got finance policy, which, by the way, we're still bound to. If the comptroller is only approving purchases for certain reasonings, we shouldn't be accepting requests that go against his policies, So, by the way, the only way I'll really be able to teach you guys this is when we start getting some student groups requesting. And I still need to kind of get into like the little details, but you learn by practice. So it's pretty simple to understand, though, that if something goes against the comptroller's policy, that's not something we would accept in the first place. So it's good to have this. Tax is on here, gifts is on here, transportation policy is on here. And I also put the ethics policy in here because no matter what you're doing as a student association official, in committee, in Senate, in whatever you're doing, you got to remain ethical. So that's also in there. Okay. Then we have the appropriations rubric, which is something that was made before my time. It was already made by the time I got here. So it's actually pretty cool. And this is just kind of when a request comes to our table, what are we looking for? So you have a time period, the group's history, supporting documents, and relation to the mission statement. And depending on how we rank it, this is something we would definitely approve. If you got some green, some yellow, we would still approve it. If you got all yellow, you could make a debate point that we probably shouldn't approve it. And if it's all red, it probably wouldn't even get to the committee floor without me changing some things up. But this is just kind of a good guide for when we get a request. So again, not only does our process take about a week or two, but the comptroller's PR process takes about 4 weeks. So if we have groups coming to us with an event in like 2-3 weeks, that is way, too short. And it's going to have to make us and the comptroller work a little faster. And if you guys saw up at the bylaws, we can actually impose a 10% reduction to any event that is in a short time span. So we can do that. And it's kind of the incentive for student groups not to submit a form super late. Also, in the group's history, we want to make sure that they're staying within the means of their budget. If they're overspending every year and they keep coming to appropriations, that's kind of not the way to do it. You should be budgeting through the Board of Finance, and we're only here for certain reasons. So that's something that we have to take a look at. Supporting documents, we don't want just invoices for everything there. If they're going to a hotel in a certain area, we should ask for competitive pricing. Same with plane tickets, stuff like that. And in relation to the mission statement. Now, you can't vote. I think I told you guys this during the presentation I gave last week. You can't vote just because you agree with, let's say, college Democrats, college Republicans. But you got to vote towards funding that goes towards their mission statement. So like I said, the college Democrats want to go to a football game in Philadelphia, that doesn't make sense. But if they want to go to a Democratic conference in Washington, D.C., that's something we would fund, regardless if we agree with the Democratic platform or not. Okay, so that's on there as well. This is the precedent tracker. Now, I do need to go into the hub and steal the 2019-2020 handbook, because every time we make a decision, we set precedent, not only for our year, but for future years. So we shut down a couple things. Like, for example, I think the pre-dental club wanted, like, excuse me for not knowing the term, but like gowns or whatever. And we didn't know if it was apparel or uniform. And I think the committee voted to approve it. So that proves that, we will shoot down personalized apparel, but in the terms of like gowns, we consider that a uniform. That's a precedent, and we have to stay consistent once we make that decision. So every time we make a pretty notable decision, the ranking member should jot this down into the precedent tracker, and we will live by that and abide by that. And we start breaking precedent, then we're not being fair to our student groups. And then lastly, this is also a requirement. You all have to have the budget. So I figured let's get it on the handbook. This is the 2020-2021 external budget. So this is what we would look for when groups have supplemental funding. So we look at what is their current budget. So here's the entire external budget. And this is probably the most helpful part of the handbook, because whenever a group comes in, oh, what's your budget allocation? Oh, what event is this for? You just take out the handbook, open up to their group, and you have their budget right there. Okay, and if this is approved today, we'll put the date, I'll give it a little signature, and we'll use it. And the only time we have to revisit it is if the bylaws change or we want to add something to it. All right, so that was the presentation of the Appropriations Handbook. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, is there any debate points? Okay, seeing no debate points, is there a motion to approve the Appropriations Handbook for the 2020-2021 academic year?
Motion to approve.
Motion from Senator Sarwar. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Hilkert. Any objections? All right, seeing none, the Appropriations Handbook is approved 2020-2021. So I'll sign this, I'll date it, and this will be in the email with the minutes that I send out to you guys. Okay, so that's that. So next on the agenda, we have our wonderful Vice Chairman of the Senate, Jordan Osley. So we're going to move into his Senate training. I see claps, I see virtual claps. So welcome. The floor is yours, and I will make you co-host in case you have, any materials you want to share. So you're co-host. There we go. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for having me. First of all, that was a great presentation of the handbook. I think that's really useful. And so thank you for giving me a little bit of time to do some training tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen. And I have a little bit of a presentation here that's going to walk us through this training. So all of you, with the exception of Chairman McCracken, are new senators. So I'm going to try and, go through this, pretty extensively so you guys can get the best training possible so you can be as effective as senators as possible. So here we have 2020-2021 Student Association Senate training. So the first thing we're going to talk about is legislation. So I've gotten personally a lot of questions about legislation, how to write bills. I know there's a lot of confusion, especially, if you've never been in this sort of environment where, you're writing bills or you're looking at bills, if you have never had an internship in public policy, this can be confusing, right? So in the Student Association Senate, we have 4 different types of legislation. The first are nomination bills, right? That's when we're nominating an individual to a position. Resolution bills, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Bylaw change bills, again, I'll get into that a little bit, and appropriation request bills, which are really important to this committee for obvious reasons. Chairman McCracken, went over them a little bit about the process by which you guys would approve these appropriation requests in committee. But they do eventually hit the Senate floor. So, every senator really needs to be familiar with them, but especially this committee. So first we have nomination bills. And before I get into the really, nitty gritty of nomination bills, I just want to start by talking about, how to write a bill itself, right? So there are a couple key components you're going to need when you're writing a bill. The first is the header, right? You're going to have this basic header with the SA logo, the Senate chair's name and the Senate vice chair's name, as well as the address and contact info for the Student Association Senate. And additionally, I just want to say, like, I have a template on my involvement. So you don't have to like make this and recreate it, because that's pretty difficult. You can go on my involvement, download the template. It's right there, so you can just copy and paste. So it's really, not that difficult, not a heavy lift for you guys. But our bills need to follow a uniform format, right? And so the first thing is this header right here. The next thing is the bill header, right? And so that's going to have a number of different components to it. First, it's going to be the bill number. So the way this kind of works is it starts with S. S stands for Senate, right? Senate bill. And then you do the session year, right? So we're in 2021. You're going to see a bill from previous years that was 1920, right? So if we were in the 1920 year, it would be 1920. Now we're in the 2020 year, so it's Senate Bill 2021. And then I usually just put X's because it's the chairman of the Senate, or the chairperson rather of the Senate, who's going to fill that in. So you can leave that blank, but you definitely need Senate Bill and then the Senate session. If you guys happen to be reelected and serve next year, it's going to be 2022, right? Pretty self-explanatory. And then date introduced, that's going to be the Senate session that you're introducing the bill. So last week we had Senate on October 7th. So right there you would write in October 7th, 10/07/2020, right? And then this is where we get into the more, I guess, interesting stuff, right? So sponsored by, that's which senator is bringing the bill to the floor, right? So if you're sponsoring this bill, you're the senator who's bringing it to the floor. You're the senator putting your name on it, right? But you can also have co-sponsors, and you'll see that in a second. These are senators who sort of either maybe they didn't necessarily write the bill, but they're putting their name on it too. They are supporting the idea. They're right there with you. They can help you present the bill and the ideas of the bill. And so you're going to put co-sponsored right under sponsors, right? And then committee, certain bills, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, particularly with bylaw bills and appropriation requests, they need to go through committee. That's in our bylaws, they have to go through committee. But even resolutions, they can possibly go through committee. And so you're gonna indicate which committee they go through. And then the vote, how the committee voted on those bills, you're gonna indicate that here as well. Whether the committee passed it or failed it, you gotta indicate that. And next is the subject, right? So that's essentially the title or the purpose of the bill. So here in a nomination bill, you would typically put something along the lines of, Director of Disability Services, Director of DPKIL, Supreme Court nomination, right? Nothing too crazy for a nomination bill, but you have to put some sort of title or subject for the bill. And then Senate vote, you don't really have to worry about that. And legislative result, that's more for the chair and the vice chair. Okay, so next, all of our legislation starts with this phrase, be it hereby proposed that the following be enacted. And that's our enacting clause, right? So if you don't write that, this essentially doesn't go into effect. So you have to put that first. And then after you put that, you're gonna do a colon and specify what's being done, what's being enacted, right? And so now this is where we get into what is a nomination bill. So for a nomination bill, you're going to first indicate the individual who you're nominating, in this case, Bailey Kennedy. You're going to indicate the position that they're being nominated to and their term, okay? And you can do this you can change up the order. Typically it's in this order. That's sort of the precedent that's been followed. But the term is really important because some positions are 1-year appointments, some terms are 2-year appointments. Some are even, you can make them a semester appointment. So, make sure that you're coordinating with the individual that you're nominating. Make sure you're referencing the bylaws and the Constitution so you know what the term should be when you're writing this bill. And then, so, if you have anything else going on to this bill, you're going to follow, it's going to be numbered. So we do Roman numerals. You have 1, section 1, right? Section 2, section 3. Potentially if you're nominating multiple people on a bill, you can do multiple sections, but at the end, your last section should always be, that this bill go into effect and then specify the time that it goes into effect. Typically, it's going to go into effect immediately. That's generally most bills aim to go into effect immediately upon passage. But I've seen, and it can be done, that you specify, this bill goes into effect January 1st, or this bill goes into effect a month from passage in accordance with the Student Association Constitution. So that's going to be your last enacting clause that you're going to put as part of the bill. And then the last and final step is going to be a space for the presidential signature. Now our bills are signed by the president, and I'll get into that, more after it's passed by the Senate. There is the opportunity for the president to sign it, similar to the United States government, right? Some bills, as you've probably seen, are not subject to presidential approval. That's to be determined by the chairman of the Senate, chairperson of the Senate. All right, so that's nomination bills. And I'll have a little bit of a time for questions if you guys have any in a second. So next I want to get to resolution bills. And these are, in my opinion, these are the fun bills, right? Because, resolution bills, they're not binding. And so because of that, while they're not binding and nobody's necessarily forced to follow them, you can really be pretty creative with them, right? Here we have, resolution for lighting on the pathways connecting the podium to State Quad. So this was a resolution that myself drafted up, and, obviously you can see co-sponsored by Chairman McCracken. So you got your vice chair and the chairman right here with the bill. And so this was calling for better lighting on State Quad, right? Now, the university determines that. They're the ones who spend the money to create lights and everything on campus, but we have an ability to sort of say that as student representatives, we're calling for action, and we as a body are resolving that, this be done. And so it does require a certain level of steps to complete the things that you want to do. But, resolutions, you're not really limited, right? The sky's the limit as far as what you can do with the resolution. But they follow a certain different format from a nomination bill. You're still going to use "be it hereby proposed that the following be enacted," right? And you're still going to number them Roman numerals. But as far as your lines, right, as far as your sections, they're all going to start with "whereas" first. You're going to initially start with "whereas," right? This is your "whereas" section. And "whereas" is stating the context, right? So what's the problem that you're addressing? What's going on? What's the climate? What's the environment? Why is this bill even being brought up? That's where you want to state that, right? So one of the things I have here is, whereas the university, I noticed there's a typo here. The university at Albany is an open campus, right? Or, you also see, whereas student safety is put at a greater risk when traveling through dark areas, right? So I'm sort of building a case, you can think of it as, right? You're setting the context. And so after each line, you're going to put "and," because it's following an order. You're not saying these things independently, they're happening together. So you want to say "whereas this," and "whereas this," and "whereas this," right? And so once you set your context, then you're going to move on to the next section, the "therefore it be resolved" section, right? And so after you set your context, then what, right? What do we do now? So we know that, student safety is put at risk in dark areas. We know that the university is an open campus, so, individuals from wherever can come and visit this campus. So what are we going to do about it? So that's where you do the resolved section, right? And so, here, to ensure safety, the administration take immediate action to install necessary lighting, right? That's what you're actually doing. And that's going to be in the "therefore it be resolved" section. And so, when you continue in your "therefore it be resolved" section, you're also going to, say "and" after each section. And then in each next section, you're going to say "therefore it be further resolved," right? So that's your continuation of what's being done. And finally, your ending section is going to be "therefore it be finally resolved," okay? And that's sort of your closing statement. And one of the interesting things about resolutions is they can be sent to all sorts of individuals on the university. You can even send them to local government, state government. You can send them to the President of the United States if you want. I don't know how you do that, but you can indicate that in the bill. And so, typically resolutions are ended with, "therefore it be finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be sent to," and here we sent it to Dr. Rodriguez, President of University, Mike Christakis, Randy Olak, number of individuals in the university to try to get these lighting installations. And as you can see, it's also ended with a section for the president's signature. This was a former president. You would use Damilola Adesanya, our current president, but same format. Okay. So next we're moving on to bylaw bills. These are very different from the others because these, the process for doing bylaw change bills it's pretty specific, and you have to follow a certain way in which you do them. You're going to start, of course, same with be it hereby proposed that the following be enacted. And then your clause is going to be the section that you're going to be changing. So here, this is a change to the 200 section. This bill was actually not introduced. This is a draft. So, this was not actually done, so don't read too much into it. But here it's going to be amending the 200 section. So that the 200 section of the Student Association bylaws be amended to read. How are you going to be changing them? And what are you changing? So you got to indicate that first. And then what you're going to do is you're pretty much going to copy and paste the section of the bylaws that you're changing. You can type it all out, but sometimes bylaw bills are really long. I think it's easier. Just copy them, paste them into your bill, right? Now, the interesting thing about our bylaws and bylaw bills, you can't just delete stuff. We need to be able to see what you're changing, right? So if I just, as you can see, I'm taking out the word secretary and replacing it with clerk, hypothetically. I can't just write the secretary clerk of the Senate because you're going to say, what was it called before? It's not going to be clear, especially considering, if we have people in the future in Senate and they're looking back to our bills to this year, they're going to be a little confused about what it was previously and what it's being changed to. So in order to remove something, you can't just delete it. You have to strike through it, right? So in this case, I'm striking through the word secretary and I'm going to replace it with the word clerk, right? And so additions, considering that the word clerk is a new word, they have to be typed in bold, okay? And so when you want to replace words, you're going to strike through it, and then after your replacement, which is an addition, is going to be in bold, right? And so then, as you can see, this is everything here that's not in bold, that's the current bylaws, and then you can see what changes are being made to it. Now I'm going to go down a little bit lower here to see this is a completely new section, right? So I'm going to focus on 200.3.4. And this is really interesting because, you need to know how to section your information when you're changing the bylaws. So all of our bylaws are numbered, right? They're numbered in sections. 200 section is particularly Senate policy, right? And then they're gonna, from each of those sections, they have like following points, right? So here, this is 200.3, right? And then it's going to be 200.3.4. Now, this states Assistant Clerk of the Student Association Senate, right? If I want to describe that more, go into more depth, I'm going to do a subsection of that. But how do we do that, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to do pretty much just take the original section, 200.3.4, and then do 0.1, right? Because it's a subsection of the 200.3.4. Gets a little confusing, but once you get the hang of it, it makes sense. It's not too hard. And then when you want to do a subsection of 200.3.4, but now this is the second subsection, right? So you're now doing two subsections. You have your first subsection, 200.3.4.1, and then the next one is going to be 200.3.4.2, right? And so, as you make new subsections, you're going to pretty much just add one to the same area. So 0.1, 0.2. Now, if you want to do a subsection of a subsection, right? Stay with me here. If you want to do a subsection of a subsection, you're going to do 200.3.4, then 200.3.4.1, and then 200.3.4.1.1. Now, when you're reading that, it makes sense. I hope it makes sense. When it's said out loud, it can be confusing because it's a lot of numbers at once, but just follow that formula, that order of things of how you do a section, then the next section, and if you want to do subsections, you do additions. And of course, at the end, your last section is going to be that this bill go into effect immediately upon passage in accordance with the Student Association Constitution, right? And they also are subject to presidential approval or possibly not at the determination of the chair, but you have to put that section for the president's signature, right? And then appropriations bills. So in the other committees, I've been kind of giving them a general overview because they're going to be voting to approve these. All appropriation bills hit the Senate floor, so they need to be able to read them and be literate in them. But since this is the Appropriations Committee, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman McCracken. If you don't mind, you can probably do it better justice than I can.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Vice Chairman, and also great job explaining the other bills. That was really well done. So thank you for that. And I guess after this, I'll throw it back to you. But so, committee, this is what an appropriations bill looks like after it's approved by our committee. What we actually vote on is just a number, a total number, and then a breakdown on a spreadsheet. And then if it is voted and approved by us, it takes this form. And so an example here now, there's a couple indicators when you look at a bill like this. So first of all, obviously you see the committee appropriations, and also look at that committee vote. There was actually a no vote. And I actually remember this bill. That was me. So, so as you can see there, that's also something to look at. You have 4 yeses, 1 no, 1 abstention. The chair must abstain unless it's a tiebreaker vote. So this bill is a supplemental funding bill, and that says that in the first section. So you see the first number there, that campus ambassador receives, and by the way, that's the name of the org, and that's usually ends up being the subject. If they're coming back twice in 1 year, then you would put in the subject campus ambassador, and then I like seeing sometimes the date, sometimes it's number 2 if they come back for more funding, which I think this group actually did. So that campus ambassador, it should have said campus ambassadors, receives the following allocation with funds being transferred from the student association's supplemental funding. Okay, it should say supplemental funding line. This is pretty early in the year, but that indicates what line it's coming from. So this is a group that already has a current budget. They're just coming back for more. And then down there below, number 2 is actually a breakdown of what they're doing. So you have the budget object. So it's a winter retreat. And then the object name is a list of items. Now, if the list of items goes over a certain amount, you actually have to do a breakdown of that amount, but it didn't go over the amount, so it's $1,000. So food, transportation, and lodging is $1,000, and the total allocation is $1,000. Now, something that's really important to note actually is that can't be there unless we have seen invoices and receipts. So our job is to make sure that the amount of money and the money that they're spending on that stuff actually was approved and reviewed by us. So by the time it hits the Senate floor, the Senate is not seeing the invoices. The Senate's not seeing the item breakdown. They're just seeing what it's for, who it's for, and how much. So what we do in our committee is actually very critical. Now, they are questioned like they are in our committee. And like I've told you guys before, the chair is the sponsor. The ranking member can also be the sponsor. You have to represent the piece of legislation. So let's say in the case there's Senator Simon's name, that's Sabre Simon. She was a chairwoman for the 2020 spring semester. Let's say she agreed with me when I voted no, right? But she abstained. She still has to be the sponsor of this bill and represent campus ambassadors. But that is actually very ironic that you picked a piece of legislation, Vice Chair Osley, that I actually voted no on. So, and sometimes people make a point of information and they ask who was the no vote, because when you see a committee vote, it's usually most of the time unanimous. When it's not, people actually sometimes question the committee and say, okay, where was this no and why? So anyway, that's an appropriations bill. So I'll throw it back to you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman McCracken. And I promise this was totally picked randomly. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here. But I do want to make this one point about the Appropriations Committee, and this also applies to the Rules Committee, because you guys, think about it as if like you're cooking spaghetti, right? You boil a pot, you got spaghetti in it, and it's just a whole bunch of mess, right? When you bring that spaghetti out, you got to put it through a strainer. So you just get the spaghetti. You just get the good stuff. You don't want all the water and all the salt, extra salt and all that nonsense. You just want the spaghetti. And that's what appropriations, that's what we need you guys to do. We need you guys to be, really literate and understanding, and make sure that the bills that hit the Senate floor are good bills. We only want the pasta, right? Because I'm gonna be honest, not every senator is going to be super interested in the finances of the supplemental and new and unfunded lines. They're not going to be super literate. So we sort of, put our trust in the Appropriations Committee in terms of appropriation requests, just like we put our trust in the the Rules Committee when they're reviewing bylaw changes, that you guys are sort of siphoning through, really not good material, so that when it comes to the Senate floor, we're confident that we're voting on stuff that was reviewed, right? So we need you guys to be an extra pair of eyes for us. So these are really important, especially for this committee. All right, so moving on is legislative memos. Now, this is not necessarily legislation itself, but they're important because every piece of legislation has to be accompanied by a memo. And this was a bylaw that was enacted, I believe, last year fall. And the whole purpose of it was that, if we're looking back to bills that were passed, years ago, and we're trying to understand, okay, our bylaws are the way they're written now, but these bylaws were passed in 1976, right? I don't know the person who wrote that. I don't know what they were thinking and what they were trying to accomplish and their point of view. So we want to make sure that our memos sort of coincide with the bills. So if somebody's looking back on our bylaws, or somebody's looking back, in this case, yeah, this is a bylaw change, or, a resolution or any bill that we pass, they can understand why we did it and what our objective was. So there's no confusion there, because oftentimes, and we have gotten into, some areas of confusion about what the bill that we're looking at, and particularly with bylaws, what the bylaws that we're looking at, what are they supposed to mean? How are we supposed to interpret them? So this sort of cuts it dry. This is the interpretation that the sponsor, the person who wrote the bill, was going for. And it also clears it up for, the senators and the president, because, I guess to an extent, you don't have to ask questions to the sponsor. You can just read it, what they're trying to do. You know what they're trying to do because you can read it, right? So this is going to follow a pretty basic format. You're going to have the bill number once again. That's going to be filled in by the chair and the vice chair at a later date. The sponsor who's sponsoring it, if you have any co-sponsors, indicate that. The title or the subject of the bill, in this case, Chief of Staff name change, which is a bill we saw, it was last meeting, so Wednesday. And then the purpose or general idea of the bill. Now, this is where you sort of generalize. This is the overview of what I'm trying to do with this bill. That's where you put it there. But then in the next section, summary of specific provisions, this can get really, really beefy, right? Because if you have a really long bill, or you have a bill that's like really extensive and has a lot to it, you're gonna need to go section by section and explain why you're writing it. Because if there's no reason that you're writing it, why is it in the bill? So if you put words down in the bill, explain why you wrote those words. They're important because you put them in the bill. They're important. So explain why you put them. And so you're going to go section by section and do that pretty much for each section. And then your justification. Now this is kind of twofold. Number one, you can explain the justification as to why it's needed. Sometimes in resolutions, you can talk about why it's needed, but also what you want to do in justification is explain why the Student Association Senate or whomever actually has the authority to put this forward. And typically you can reference either the bylaws, for example, with committee appointments, the chair of the Senate has to sponsor those. And so in justification for that, the chair of the Senate would essentially reference the bylaws and say that it's their responsibility and their duty to make committee appointments. That's part of their justification. If it's a resolution, part of your justification can go back to the Constitution that we have a right to pass this legislation, right? So that's going to be in your justification. Prior legislative history. This is also pretty important if you really want to be thorough and build your case, because if you are presenting a bill that has been talked about, has been deliberated on in previous legislation, you should put that in your memo, put that and make a point of that. It can also help your argument as far as, actually getting your bill passed. And then fiscal implications, if your bill is requiring student association money, right, student activity fee money, you put fiscal implications. Not necessarily if it's requiring, university, state, anything like that. We're not really bothered with that. That's other people's money, right? But if we're spending our own money, we have to specify what are the fiscal implications so that it's known, it's out there, that we are now spending student money to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then effective date, I've talked about that before, but that's going to coincide with the effective date on your actual bill. All right, so I had a little activity where we would write a bill. I think I'm going to do that at the end if we have time, if there's interest, but I'm going to keep going. So for right now, I'm going to say, are there any questions about legislation?
Any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you go back to the slide, the appropriations?
Yeah, this one?
Yeah. So the process with this is that, so first a student group will come to us for supplemental funding, and we'll meet with them all together. Then we decide whether it's yes or no or fair or whatnot. And then, so we go through all of the numbers, we consolidate it, which basically seems like that's what this really is consolidation. Then we write this bill with the consolidated numbers, and then we bring it to Senate. And that's the process of how this goes throughout the year, correct?
Yep, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty much like, if you want to think about it like this, the Appropriations Committee is doing the heavy lifting, and then you bring it to Senate to make sure Senate approves of what the committee's doing. Are there any other questions?
Yep. Any other questions?
All right. Well, maybe I'm doing a thorough job, so take
I
it
think
as
you are. Go ahead. Keep going.
All right. So how to pass a bill. So, this is important. First, I wanted to mention bylaw change bills. They first have to go through rules. They can't even be considered unless you send them to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee meets on, they meet on Fridays, Friday evenings. So you want to make sure that you send that to Andrew Scott, who is our Rules Chairman. Send that to him before Friday so that the Rules Committee, they can deliberate on it so your bill can actually hit the Senate floor. That's in our bylaws. If it doesn't go to rules, it can't come to Senate, right? And similarly, appropriation requests, student groups are going to come to the Appropriations Committee first. And then all bills, I recommend as vice chair, if they can, should go through committee. It's always good. I like seeing committee votes. I like when we have committees that are seeing legislation and can get a double look on it, and can, sort of deliberate on it to make bills a little better. If you're dealing with a bill that's going to be in relation to, students, right, and student relations with the Student Association and the Student Association Senate, try sending it through the Constituent Relations Committee. Let them get a look at it. Let them get their, 2 cents on it, because their committee, that's what they deal with. So it's good to have people who are sort of specializing in that area to see it. Similarly, if, sort of anything, if you are trying to maybe plan an event, right? I don't know, this might be a resolution as well, but if you want to see an event created, send it through community engagement and outreach, right? We should sort of get into that habit. So I recommend that. It's not required unless it's a bylaw change going to rules or appropriation request to appropriations, but it's recommended. And it also strengthens your case when you come to the Senate floor. People can see, okay, this went through committee, this was double looked, it had a unanimous vote. It strengthens your argument for why the bill should pass. It's also recommended that you reach out to your fellow senators. It's always good, like I said, to have, a new set of eyes looking at your bill and giving their input. You don't have to go overboard, but certainly, if you're the only one writing the bill, you don't know if anybody else is really there with you. So make sure you're getting other people's input. I think conversations make for better legislation. So let's say you passed your bill, right? Congratulations, good. You got the votes in Senate. What happens next? Very similar to the federal government. Once it goes from the legislative branch, it goes to the executive branch, to the president, who can either sign it or they can veto it. Now, I think we know what a veto is. It's pretty much a non-signature. They're saying they don't approve of the legislation, but it's not the end-all be-all. Senate still can't override that veto with a 2/3 vote. So, consider that. If it's a nomination, bylaw change, or appropriation request, congratulations, you're done. Very good. If it's a resolution, you may have to follow up and do some more work, because resolutions are not binding. So you need to make sure if you pass a resolution, right, you have to talk to the necessary people to get that resolution actually in action. So going back to a resolution that myself and Senator McCracken, Chairman McCracken passed with the lighting, you know, we passed a bill that said there needs to be lighting on State Quad. I can't build that. I don't have the money to build lights, right? We had to go to the administration. They have to build it. So we need to set up meetings and talk to administration, not only send them the bill, but, you know, talk to them and express why this is a need and why they need to be doing this, and actually compel them to actually get it done. So it does take a little bit more work, but you will definitely see you will reap the reward of that work, you know, if you do follow up. So make sure on resolutions you follow up, and of course reach out to Chairman Ramsaran or myself, and we're happy to help you follow up to see your resolutions come to reality. Okay, so Robert's rules. So Robert's rules, they may be a little dry. I'm going to try and make them as interesting as I can. I find them interesting, but they're important nonetheless, right? So why do we use Robert's rules? So Robert's rules establish order for the meeting, all right? They allow for everyone to be heard, and they allow the organization, in this case, Senate, to make decisions without confusion, okay? And so if you have ever been in a meeting or in a group and everybody's talking over each other, there's no order, certainly. You can't hear some people half the time, right? You're talking and somebody's talking over you and somebody else is talking. You can't necessarily hear what's being said, right? And you can't make decisions without confusion because you got 5 people saying things all at once. You don't know where the consensus is. You don't know how you're actually going to be moving forward. So that's what Robert's Rules does. It's a long-standing thing. Many organizations use it, and it brings organizations together and allows them to facilitate meetings and do their business properly, right? Okay, so I want to get into a motion. A motion is the main way in which Robert's Rules is facilitated, in which our meetings are facilitated. And so they're called motions. I like to think they're called motions because they move the meeting forward, right? I've been vice chair and I've had to be acting chair in numerous situations. I don't move the meetings, right? I often say that senators, you guys control the meetings. You guys move the meetings. The meetings operate to you guys, to your will, essentially, as senators, right? And so motions allow you to do that. If there are no motions, if there's nothing on the agenda, we're just sitting pretty, right? We're not doing anything. So you can motion to move forward. You can motion to move backwards. You can motion to take a break. You can motion to do anything. And so that's my next point. Don't feel limited in the types of motions you can make. If you want to motion to take a 15-minute recess and have all the senators do jumping jacks, make that motion. I don't know if it would get a second. I don't know if it would pass, but you can certainly make it, right? And so don't feel limited. You can sort of do anything. Prakash, I see you raised your hand. You have a question?
Yeah, do you have a question here? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay, so I thought that there was like a set list of motions that you can make. So I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. There's not, you can technically motion for anything. You just need someone to second it and then no one to object to it, right?
Yeah, so technically you can motion for about anything, but there's a structure here. These have been compiled for, years now as far as meeting procedure. And there is a list, and I'll get to that. I think it's my next slide, of certain motions and specific language that is used in those motions. In certain motions, sometimes you don't need a second. And sometimes there isn't the opportunity to object, right? And so certain motions are a little special. So that's why we highlight those. But I think people get a little caught up and think, oh, these are the only motions I can make. These are the ones listed in the handbook. These are the ones listed in Robert's Rules. Not true. You can make a motion. This is your meeting. We're going to meet under the terms of the senators, right? All right, so it is my next slide. So these are some of the ones that were in the handbook. I also have a cheat sheet here with a little bit of a more extensive list. And I'm going to send this out to Chairman McCracken, and hopefully he can send it out to you all so you can get access to the slides as well as this link. But these are the ones that are listed in the handbook, and I want to go over them. First, I want to go over point of information and point of inquiry. This is like the most confusing motion I've seen in Senate, right? So I'm going to start with the point of inquiry. A point of inquiry is about procedure, okay? Point of inquiry, what bill are we voting on? Point of inquiry, where are we in the legislative agenda? point of inquiry, does this motion need a second? Those are point of inquiries, right? And you can even do a parliamentary inquiry, which is, speaking to our parliamentarian or deputy parliamentarian about Robert's rules and Senate procedure, right? So that's point of inquiry. A point of information is a little different. And people often get those two mixed up, and they often think that a point of information is the opportunity for you to provide information. Point of information is an opportunity for you to request information. And, point of informations, I feel like they're often wrongly used because they're more about concrete information. If you need dates, times, if you want to, cite a specific bylaw, right? You can point of information for a specific bylaw or a specific provision of the Constitution to be, cited or presented. That's a point of information. Point of information is not about somebody's view, about somebody's position. You can point of information about a vote, right? And say, who did this? You can point of information to see a specific part of the minutes, right? To read what people say. But it's not about, getting information about somebody's particular position on something. It's not about giving your information or your opinion. It's not about that. So I just want to clear that up first. Next, I want to talk about the procedure for motions, right? So typically what happens is for most motions, you need to be recognized, okay? And recognition has to come from the chair of the Senate. You can't just call out what you want to do, right? Then we're going to dissolve into chaos and we're out of order, right? So for most motions, you need to raise your hand. That's typically how we do it. You need to raise your hand. The chair will call on you and you can make your motion. Once you made your motion, most of the times they need a second. Most people, they know what a second is, but they kind of don't know what a second is. There's a reason behind why we ask for a second. If you make a motion and nobody's there with you, right? If you motion for every senator to get up and do jumping jacks, and nobody really wants to do jumping jacks, the motion fails, right? If you're the only one who wants to do it, why are we even entertaining a motion that only one person wants to do, right? That's not really fair. That's not democratic, right? So we ask that at least two people support that motion, and that's a second. Sometimes, you need multiple people because, some issues are a little bit more, I guess, controversial, and we want to see that it's not just two people. We want to see maybe five, maybe, a certain specific number that, say that they support that to even entertain the motion, right? So that's a second. And then an objection, obviously, if you disagree with the motion, you can object. And the reason why we give time for an objection is because if you make a motion and then it gets a second and nobody objects, the motion passes, right? The objection is sort of, does anybody disagree with this? And if nobody disagrees, if nobody stands up and says, I object, if everybody's silent, then that indicates nobody objects. Everybody's cool with it. If there is an objection, that doesn't necessarily mean that the motion fails. It just means that somebody's stepping up and saying, I don't like this. I want to vote against this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to, have this motion pass. I object. And then we're going to go into debate and everything like that. And eventually, if nobody sort of rescinds, if nobody, sort of gives ground, then it will come to a vote if need be. So now I'm going to go through a couple of the motions. So motion to adjourn. Oh, before I get into that, some of these motions need different levels of threshold for their vote. So motion to adjourn, that's going to close the meeting. And while I'm talking about that, I do want to talk about a motion to recess, very similar, but different. Motion to adjourn closes the session, right? So we're done. A motion to recess is a break in a sense. Now, typically what we've done is a motion to recess for 5 minutes, 30 minutes. We haven't actually done as long as 30 minutes, but typically like 2 or 5 minutes, right? But you can motion a recess for like a whole week. You can motion a recess for a month. I don't know how popular that would be, but it's possible, right? And that means that the session, right? So if we were, our next upcoming meeting is what, the 13th, I think. If we're in the middle of that meeting and somebody motions to recess, they can motion to recess indefinitely, or if they want to motion to recess for 3 days, we're going to be on a recess and we're still going to be in that meeting for that 3-day time. We're just going to be in a break. A motion to adjourn, it's closed, right? And so now you can start sending new legislation to the chair. Now we're going to have a new session. A recess is just a break and we're still in the old session. So you have to sort of know the difference between that, and you can use that to your advantage if you'd like. So that's a motion to adjourn and a motion to recess. Question of privilege. This is if you're complaining about something. This has been done before. It's not necessarily, like you see here, it doesn't need a vote. This is a personal thing. If you want to complain about something, you can just make a point of personal privilege. If the chair recognizes it, you can state your complaint for the record. This is an interrupting motion, and I'll talk a little bit more about interrupting motions when we get to a point of order at the end. But this is an interrupting motion, so keep that in mind. Motion to table, we've seen that before. Motion to table is not necessarily that the bill fails, it's just sort of being put aside. And it can be put aside indefinitely and never brought back up. But it's not necessarily saying that the bill passed or failed, it's just, put aside. Motion to call to question, this is to close debate, right? And this actually needs a 2/3 majority, which is something that that we've been doing incorrectly. And I joined Senate last year, and this has always been a majority vote, but according to Robert's rules, it's a 2/3 majority. And so, we've been doing that wrong, but, I want to give you guys the correct information. So if, there's a motion to call to question and it comes to a vote, it needs a 2/3 vote. So if it doesn't get a 2/3 vote, you're feel free to call myself or Chairman Ramsaran out on that. And motion to limit debate, that as well needs 2/3. Typically, we've been doing that by a simple majority, but it does, according to Robert's rules, it needs 2/3. And so a motion to limit debate or a motion to close debate, very similar. Closing debate means we're at a debate. Typically, then we facilitate a vote. Not necessarily, but typically that's what comes next. Limit debate is just saying, and that's up to the motioner, you only want 5 more debate points, or you only want, 30 more minutes of debate on this specific issue, right? That's limit debate, pretty self-explanatory. Motion to add to agenda, once again, pretty self-explanatory. You want to add something onto our agenda for the day. That takes a majority vote. A motion to amend. This is something I do want to highlight this, because a sponsor of a bill, they can amend their legislation as they see fit. They wrote the bill, they're sponsoring the bill. If they want to change something, they can change it, right? But senators, even if you're not a sponsor or co-sponsor, even if you didn't write it, you can amend legislation on the floor. Don't feel afraid. If there's something a part of this legislation that you don't like, you don't feel comfortable with, amend it. You can change it to make it more suitable to what you like and more suitable to what possibly could get passed. What I've seen, and I'm kind of gonna vent a little bit about Senate. What I've seen is typically, we have bills that come to the floor and people, say they're against them, they don't like the bill, X, Y, and Z, or they might even say that they like the bill, they just don't like a certain part of it. That's not necessarily a reason to vote no. That might be a reason to amend the bill to something that you like. I think too many times we have bills that fail, but, if there was just one amendment, they would have passed. So, be confident, make those amendments. I want to see bills passing, right? I want to see good bills passing that the majority of Senate wants and likes to see. So make those amendments to make bills better so that they'll eventually, pass in Senate. Of course, this can be used, I guess, counterintuitively. If there's a bill that you don't like, you can make amendments and see if you have enough support to make a bill sort of unviable and kill it. But, that's something to think about strategically. So a point of order, and this is when I want to get into interrupting. A point of order is about enforcing the rules, right? So if somebody is speaking and they weren't recognized by the chair, we don't want that, right? We want to speak one at a time. Everybody gets a chance to be heard. We don't want everybody speaking at once. So if people start speaking out of order, make a point of order, ask the chair to recognize that and to make sure that the rules are being enforced so that, we're not speaking over each other or any other rule that's going on. We've seen a lot of that this Senate. In my time in Senate, you're going to see it a whole lot. So get used to point of orders, get comfortable using them, because that's what's going to keep us functioning efficiently. A lot of people get annoyed by point of orders. I'm going to be frank with you guys. A lot of people get annoyed by them, but they're good. They're actually good because they make us run efficiently and they make sure that we're following the rules that we all agreed to, right? And it's interrupting. And this is when I want to talk about interrupting motion. The whole reason that we have interrupting motions is because most motions you need to wait your turn, so to speak, to be recognized. But if people are breaking the rules, you can't wait your turn and then 5 people later, now you're going to say, oh, 5 people ago, we should have been enforcing the rules. That doesn't really make any sense. You need to enforce the rules now. You need to enforce them constantly and consistently. So if you see, the rules are being broken, point of order, interrupt the meeting, cut it off, and make sure the rules are being enforced moving forward. Same thing with personal privilege. If you have a complaint issue, you can't wait, 5 people later to register that complaint. You want to make sure that the complaint is recognized while you're seeing it being done, so it's stopped, so it's cut off, right? So you can interrupt on a question of privilege as well. And then point of inquiry, point of information, I've been over those already, but those are also interrupting. Pretty much, if you don't know what you're voting on, or if you have a question about the procedure, if you want certain information to be brought forward and cited, you should be able to interrupt and make sure that that's brought timely, right? And that's why you can interrupt on those. Motion to rescind. So this is a little interesting. Once again, if you are the person who made the motion, similar to if you're the person who's bringing forth the bill, you have the right to rescind that motion. You have the right to amend your bill. However, if there's another senator who doesn't like the motion that you made, any senator can motion to rescind, right? But it does need a 2/3 majority. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because, if I make a motion and the Senate body wants to strip my motion, that shouldn't just be a simple majority. It needs 2/3. Even if you disagree with my motion, it should require 2/3 to make sure that, that motion actually should not be considered. So that's a motion to rescind. Motion to reconsider. This is a little complicated because that's about voting. And if you want to reconsider your vote, so let's say you vote on something and you made a mistake or you change your mind, you can motion to reconsider. I believe you do need to change your vote, or at least that was the precedent from last year. I'm going to look at that a little deeper and make sure that's accurate. But that requires a majority vote, even just to reconsider. Because to reconsider, we're going to go back into a vote on something we already voted on, right? So we need to vote to make sure that we even want to reconsider that. And typically the reason that is because if you're the one person who made the mistake, or even if, let's just not say made a mistake, but hopefully you're not making mistakes. Hopefully you're just changing your mind. You're the one person who's changing your mind, but everybody else is like, no, I'm going to vote the same. I mean, they might be courteous to you and say, okay, we're going to give you the chance to, change your vote for the record. But, that's going to take time and not everybody wants to spend that time. So it does need a vote to make sure that the majority of the Senate body wants to take the time to go back and re-vote on something. And then executive session. An executive session is essentially saying that any member who's not officially a part of Senate, right? So the public, anybody, the press, we have a student press, but, it's not like the press like in the real world, I guess. But anybody who's not a member of Senate or ex officio member, they're out of the room, they're out of the Zoom meeting, they're out of the call. That's an executive session. And so you can motion to go into an executive session if you want to talk about something sensitive, or even if you just feel the need to go into an executive session, you can motion to do that. And that takes a majority vote. Once again, can't interrupt for that, needs a second. It is debatable. Not every motion is debatable, like a point of order, not debatable. Point of inquiry, not debatable for obvious reasons, right? But many motions are debatable. I will mention, to limit debate, that's not debatable. To close debate, that's not technically debatable. So I think we need to do a little studying up on our Robert's rules. And once again, executive session, majority vote, right? So that's just a bit of a crash course with Robert's rules. I hope a lot of that makes sense. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. There's a cheat sheet here. You can Google it. A lot of organizations use Robert's rules. It's very accessible. All right. So viewpoint neutrality. So Chairman McCracken talked about this a little bit already in our meeting, but essentially when you're making decisions, particularly for appropriations on appropriations requests, or really anything in terms of funding, they need to be viewpoint neutral. And this is explicitly in our bylaws because, and Chairman McCracken expressed this, right? If I'm part of college Democrats, right? I'm a Democrat, right? Proud Democrat. And my organization, we want to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with Chuck Schumer, who's Democrat senator from New York, right? But, you're part of college Republicans. You're a Republican, and you don't like Chuck Schumer. He's a Democrat. And you don't want us meeting with Chuck Schumer, right? That's not really a valid reason to vote against our organization facilitating our business. And it's just not really right. Just because you disagree with our viewpoint, we're facilitating business that coincides with our organization's mission statement. We're students. We're trying to enhance our experience as students at the university. Unless there's a valid reason or concern as to, what we're actually going to be doing, like Chairman McCracken, if we're trying to spend funds just to go to a football game or something that really doesn't make sense if we're the college Democrats, that's a valid reason to vote no. But just because you don't like the ideology of the Democratic Party, or, even if it's something like we have the, I forget exactly what it's called, but the Planned Parenthood Club. It's called something else, but it's Planned Parenthood is in the name. We shouldn't necessarily be voting against them just because Planned Parenthood might be controversial and we don't agree with, Planned Parenthood as an organization and their ideology and their, viewpoint. We need to make sure that their, operations coincide with their mission statement, even if we disagree with their views. If it coincides and it's a valid reason for them to receive funding, then, they have a valid reason to receive that funding. And also, and this doesn't necessarily apply to appropriations, but it's just good knowledge. Oversight and reform, when they have hearings, they need to be operating viewpoint neutral as well. Because if you have an individual who comes to an oversight and reform committee hearing and people don't like that individual personally, but they didn't do anything wrong, you shouldn't be, voting to punish that individual or take any action against that individual just because you don't like them personally, right? It needs to be substantive. And that's essentially viewpoint neutrality. And I believe that has to be maintained on all the decisions we make, even in debate, even in the questions we ask. So one of the, I guess, most frequently referenced things that we see in Senate is when a club, an organization comes to Senate requesting funding, you can't ask, well, how many people are going to be attending this event, okay? And the reason why is because we have organizations of all different sizes. We have organizations with 50, 60, 70, 80 people, and you have organizations that are like, 6 to 10 people. The organizations who are smaller, they shouldn't be, I guess, discriminated against simply because they're a smaller organization. They still have a valid reason for having their organization and facilitating their business. And, they're enriching the student experience, even if it's only 6 to 10 people or however large it is, right? And so that's not a valid reason to deny their funding. So you will see, even in question, even in debate, and even in voting, viewpoint neutrality has to be maintained. And lastly, Constitution and bylaws. These are on my involvement. It's my recommendation that all of you download the Constitution and the bylaws, review them, review your individual responsibilities as a senator, which are in the 200 section, in terms of attendance, in terms of voting. And I've mentioned this before, in Senate in my opening remarks. You can be impeached if you're not showing up, if you're not voting. That's sort of shucking your responsibilities as a student representative. So make sure you're showing up, as well as showing up to your committee meetings. And Chairman McCracken, I'm sure you're going to make your decision as far as the expectations on that. But there are even specific expectations in the bylaws as far as your responsibilities as a committee member rather, on appropriations. So review that. Town halls, if any of you guys are living area senators, I believe Sarwar, technically you as off campus, you're technically a living area senator. So town halls are part of your responsibilities as a living area senator to facilitate. Communication, all senators need to have an open line of communication. That's typically through Instagram, typically email, but you can really do it however you want. You just need an open public line of communication, right? So, and I'll be very explicit. If you have an Instagram, but your Instagram is on private, that's not an open line of communication, because if I'm a constituent of yours and I need to contact you, but your Instagram is private, I don't have your email, I don't have, any way to contact you, how are you representing me? How am I able to, express my concerns to you as my representative. So you need to have some form of open communication. But yeah, I'm not going to read line by line the bylaws to you all. I will say, definitely review them, go over them, keep them handy. They're important, no doubt. Okay. And so that's it. That's all I got. I do have a Kahoot, but before, thank you. But before I do that, are there any questions?
Any questions for Vice Chairman Osley? Seeing that, before we go into the Kahoot, did you want to make the decision whether or not we're going to write a bill? Does the committee want to write a bill?
Yeah, I'll leave that up to the committee.
No.
That's a no. Okay. Anyone else in the committee wishing to be heard?
Yeah, I think we should write a bill.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so now it's up to you, Senator Hilkert. What? I'm sorry?
I'm gonna go ahead and say no.
I'm going to say no. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Senator Sarwar. We're not going to write a bill now, but I know the vice chairman has office hours, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to walk you through writing a bill, especially if you have an idea. You can actually make a real bill. So if that's okay, I will yield back to you, Vice Chairman Osley, if you want to do the Kahoot.
Absolutely. So let me see. Let me get this up. But yeah, definitely, if you have ideas for the bills, like I said, template is on my involvement. So, I'm gonna see if I can get this going.
Okay,
All right, so there's the game pin. If you guys want to join up, we can play.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say I'm gonna suspend the Robert's rules for the sake of the Kahoot game, so anyone can speak out if they want. Is that okay, Vice Chairman?
Oh, absolutely. This is your meeting.
Okay, I just want to make sure
I've never played this game before.
Oh yeah, so just go to www.kahoot.it and then just type in this number. It's just like a quiz game, I guess. I have some Robert's Rules questions, some bill writing questions. 10 questions, shouldn't take too long.
Oh, jeez.
I want to take a guess at who that is.
I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is either. Who got the money? Come on.
All right, so I think everybody, I'm going to assume that's Sarwar. I'm going to assume this too. So I'm going to assume everybody's here, unless that's Chairman Ramsaran, but I'm going to get it started.
Oh, God. Horrible.
Here we go.
Which of these cannot interrupt the meeting? Point of order, motion to call to question, question of privilege, point of inquiry. All right, nice. You guys were paying attention.
Oh, come on, committee. Let's go.
If the motion does not receive a second, what happens? The Senate goes into debate, the motion is passed, the motion fails, the meeting ends. Everybody's getting them right. I don't know if we're gonna have a winner. Well, actually, yeah, it depends on how fast you get it. Right now, money chair at the top. True or false? A resolution can only address a student association issue. True or false? That's correct. We've been over that. Yeah, you can do administration, university, state, local, anything.
Decor's hot. Decor's hot. On
Which of
fire.
these reviews and votes on changes to the SA bylaws? Executive Committee, Oversight and Reform, Constituent Relations, Rules and Administration. Committee question. Ooh, Rules and Administration. So send your bylaws to rules. Make sure you get them to rules. Chairman Scott.
Vice Chairman, before you move on, if I may, whoever put oversight and reform, they enforce bylaws. So if maybe that was a sort of confusion, I figured I'd just add that, depending on who amends, who enforces it, like if a bylaw is broken, stuff like that. Felt like I would add that in there.
Very true. Yeah, if bylaws are broken, oversight and reform, they're going to make sure that the student association is following the bylaws. So important to note. True or false? Living area senators must hold at least one town hall for their constituents per semester. So that's 2 per year, 1 per semester. Yep. That was actually a recent bylaw that was passed last year that requires living area senators to have town halls each semester. Money Chair still at the top.
Come on, guys. Come on, boys.
The gap is widening.
Wait, am I cheating? Is that cheating? Come on.
I don't think it's cheating. I'm just saying you have an advantage.
Whoa. Hey, listen, we all been through the same training, huh?
What motion should be used to change language of a current bill or motion on the floor? Motion to amend, motion to table, motion to reconsider, point of information. What kind of motion can change? Yep, motion to amend. Yeah. Mason, on the come up. True or false? Can a bill that was vetoed be reintroduced to override? Yep, that's true. Just like the US government. Oh, I didn't show the scores. Senators are responsible for attending weekly Senate meetings, voting, providing a means of their communication, all of the above. Yep, all the above. You gotta do all of them. All right, let's see these scores. Mason, you're catching up. You're catching up. True or false? Any senator has the power to call a special session if approved by a simple majority. I read that wrong. My bad. Yep, true.
Oh, I clicked. It was me. Oh no, my big thumb. No, there I go.
Overtaken by both Mason and Prakash. Wow.
I
Last
should be
question.
sure.
Bonus. Both Chairman Ramsaran and Vice Chairman Osley are from this part of New York: Albany County, Queens, Manhattan, or Long Island. Interesting. Yeah, Long Island. We're both from Long Island. I'm from Dix Hills. Chairman Ramsaran's from Bayshore. We're not too far apart. So look at that. Let's see. Prakash, third. Okay.
No.
Ooh. Chairman McCracken, second.
Let's go.
Wow, look at that.
Let's go, Senator Hilkert.
First year senator, freshman at the university, beat Chairman McCracken at Kahoot Senate training. That's crazy. All right, guys. It was
Put that in
great.
your report. Put that in your report.
I'll hand it back to you, Chairman McCracken.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun. We'll put Robert's rules back in order. Any questions for the vice chair or anything? Kahoot, training, any of the sorts? Seeing none, thank you so much, Vice Chairman Osley. That was a great and a very elaborate training, and we really do appreciate that. I know this is recorded as well. I'm sure you're doing this for all committees, but I will send you this recording as well if you want to use it, because it was a really, really well done. I know Senator Fang will be able to review it as well. So that concludes new business with that wonderful training. So we're now going into closing remarks. So the one thing I will say is we will be what was I going to say? We will be advertising about the forms. I'm going to try to get a flyer out. Hopefully the executive branch can help me out with that, just like they have in the past. And the forms will stay live. My office hours are starting tomorrow. Again, anyone can come to my office hours if you need any help, any assistance. I will be laying out the committee attendance And until then, please, any questions, reach out to me. I know that we will start receiving requests soon, and we'll learn as we go. So is there any closing remarks from any of the senators present in the meeting? Go ahead, Senator Takor.
I just have a question about the financial literacy test.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Go ahead.
So I sent the email that I was supposed to the deputy comptroller, but like, when is it? And like, where do I study for that?
That's right. Okay, so that was supposed to go in my report. So thank you for reminding me. So the financial literacy exam, per the bylaws, every appropriations member has to pass it. Just so you guys know, it still says treasurer's exam, and you guys are only required to get it 80% per the bylaws, okay? So I just want to say I would prefer if you passed off the margin that the comptroller is looking for, but you only have to get it 80%. So if you end up failing but go above the 80%, we got to go off the bylaws. So let me know. But basically, we all have to pass that exam. So thank you, by the way. I know I texted you guys. If you did send your net ID over, you should have access to the exam, but you do want to study the handbook first. So what I'll do is I will send you the financial literacy handbook to all of you in my next email, and you're going to have to know the contents of that, because the finance policy and what our student groups are required to know and required to do, we should know it, because that's going to come into their appropriations requests. So what I'll do is, I think it's available on my involvement, but I'll send you guys my office hours link on Zoom. Please come to my office hours at any time this week, and I will kind of show you guys the ropes, teach you guys a little about the handbook and what's important to know. Let me just also add that there is no specific timeline, but you guys all are required to pass it. I would prefer if we all passed it before we reviewed our first group, because that would be a first official vote as a committee member. That's not indicated in the bylaws. It's something we have to clean up. But yeah, like I said, you all have to pass it, and technically, you just have to get it 80%, because that's what the bylaw says. Any other questions? Wonderful. So I will also add to the closing remarks saying, obviously, our ranking member legislation did get shot down last Senate, so we still need a ranking member. So please, to the other members of the committee, if you're interested in ranking member of the committee, please email me, and we will talk to the chair about that. Okay? Any other closing remarks? Seeing none, we're going into closing roll. Senator Takor?
Here.
Okay. Senator Sarwar?
Here.
Senator Hilkert?
Here.
Senator Fang is not present. And Tanner McCracken, I am here. Okay, so can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn from Senator Sarwar. Is there a second? I think that was a second from Senator Hilkert. Is there any objections? Seeing none, we are adjourned, Appropriations Committee, at 3:27 p.m. So thank you, everybody. I will stop the recording.